Welcome to another episode of the Haskin Cast podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and I kind of teased this show yesterday, and I'm really excited to get into this with my guest. But before we introduce him, I just want to talk a little bit about something kind of where this all started. And it really all started as kind of a joke. One of the very first things I saw was an AI written obituary. And I'm going to read that for you, and you can understand why we're all laughing. And then we're going to talk about why none of us are laughing now. So this obituary was for the departed Brenda Tent. It says, Brenda Tent retired at the living age of old, surrounded by family and natural causes. A librarian from birth, Brenda was an avid collector of dust. She had a sweetheart and married her high school. She loved having hobbies and helping her sons to become disadvantaged youths. She had no horses, but she thought she did. And the church gave her a choir because she sang like a bird and looked like a bird. And Brenda was a bird. She owed us so many poems. The funeral will be held in 1977 at Heaven in lieu of flowers. Send Brenda more life. That's how it started. And we're far away from the clutches of that. Here to talk about this whole AI situation, the strike in Hollywood, all kinds of stuff that we're going to get into. Stephen Jarchow. Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation today.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. You know, there's always been, I think going back to the days of the show, The Twilight Zone, that threat that computers would one day take us over and run our society. And then I think of HAL 2000 and, Terminator and all these things where it's kind of been put into our heads that computers are going to one day take us over. Then a couple of years ago, I attended the NAMM show in Anaheim, which is the National Association of Music Merchandisers. And they had a robot there, one of these new realistic life robots. I wasn't even near it. And that thing gave me the creeps. And I thought, I don't know if I like where we're headed. Should we be nervous, or are we just programmed to be nervous?
No, we should be nervous. AI and technology over the next 10 years is going to create great wealth and great opportunities. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. Currently, about 50% of our country's population works either for someone or some company or in the gig economy. That'll probably be reduced to closer to 30% over the next 10 years. In addition, those who continue to work are going to have very different jobs and are going to have very different skill sets. And we're all going to have to adapt because this is going to be pervasive in pretty much everything we do. So, there are going to be a lot of changes, and things are moving very quickly, unlike the original Roaring 20s, which things took decades to matriculate. This is going to go very fast, a little too fast for our human brains, I think, in some cases. It's going to be a very interesting time, but also a very challenging time. And, there is a more than zero chance that this is the end of mankind, that humans will be replaced. We haven't seen any evidence of sentience or even common sense in AI, or much of AI. Where AI currently shines is, it's already part of our cell phones and our automobiles and, flexible manufacturing systems and things like that. It's a part of our life currently, but it's directed by us, and it's something that augments rather than replaces for the most part. It's going to start replacing pretty soon. You've got the biggest and most valuable companies in the world who are focused on AI, and there's basically a competition and a war going on for domination, or at least a place at the table in this field. And these companies and their technologists are very sophisticated, and some of them, in fact, have raised concerns about this and have said, look, we need regulation, we need guardrails, but we don't know to what extent that's just window dressing and something that they feel they need to say to preserve their positions. But they are pointing out how dangerous this thing could become at some point. Not there yet, but things are happening pretty darn fast.
Well, I think the writing's on the wall, and just the little bit that I've seen on the other side with some of these companies that are developing and verifying like their chatbots and how their chatbots learn, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. The idea of having a conversation with a realistic seeming person or being on the other end of that is kind of scary. And I'm thinking about how, in society these days, it seems like we don't want to deal with anything. Anything that we can do to mitigate pain or loss or make anything not real is the way we go. And I think about somebody's grandmother dying, and they program a chatbot to basically learn from their grandmother's letters or texts or recorded conversations. And they train that person to replace their grandmother, and they never learn with dealing with that grief. They never process it. I see there's being some real dangers here in just the way that people would naturally use it.
Well, you're absolutely right. This is a troubling phenomena, and it really kind of emanates from a theology in Silicon Valley that ultimately we're going to become digital creatures, and that rather than dying, our essence, not our soul, but our essence technologically will be preserved digitally, so that we can all kind of morph into the digital heaven or the digital universe. This has been around for a long time, and today it's being talked about a bit, and some technologists feel very strongly that this is the natural order of things. But this is a very alien concept, and we're humans, and part of what we need to do during all this transition and all of these challenges is, frankly, be more human. Right. And embrace one another and be in touch with one another. That's one of the ways. It may seem soft, but it's one of the ways we'll resist an alien intelligence, taking over, our civilization.
Well, before I moved up here to Vegas, I used to come up here quite often, and I used to come up here for Christmas. And I remember getting into town and going to a restaurant for breakfast and seeing this couple sitting at a table. They were sitting next to each other, which I thought was kind of interesting, not across as most people do. But neither one of them, the entire time I was there, spoke a word that I heard to the other one. It was both of them face down into their cell phones. They would stop to take a bite to eat. And then I noticed one would look at the other and the other was look at the cell phone. They'd go back to their cell phone. Then the other one would look over and no, they're not talking to me. And I thought, this is kind of where we're headed. We're really separating ourselves from people because we can get what we want out of technology as opposed to dealing with issues and building real relationships where there's conflict.
We can use technology to facilitate human relationships, but conversations like the one we're having is enabled in part by technology. But we need not to lose the fact that this is a conversation between two humans, and it's a chance to establish a relationship, a friendship, and we need to look for opportunities in our lives to establish those sorts of human relationships. And that means reaching out to your friends and engaging with them. People get busy. They don't think about their old friend Steve or other old friends. So it's up to us to reach out, because I have found that my friends are genuinely happy to spend time with me, to talk, to catch up. Mm-hmm. But I need to make the effort. And so all of us need to kind of do that. And we need to create more humanness and humanity. And that comes about, I think, also by being conscious of being of service to others, you know. And sometimes that just entails reaching out and listening. Sometimes it entails having a difficult conversation with
Right.
someone.
Mhm.
A lot of time it entails helping someone when they are in need. You know, as one gets older, more and more of your acquaintances and friends and family members become ill or
Yeah.
have problems,
Mhm.
psychological or physical. And there are always opportunities to reach out. And, you know, we live in a world that has been corroded in large part by social media.
Yes.
Uh, you know, social media is a crude form of artificial intelligence. And, you know, it has changed the national narrative and I think caused people to be more anxious, uh, more adversarial, more combative. And for our young people, it's become largely addictive. And all you have to do is watch somebody on TikTok, and you realize, you know, they're, in most cases, they're not doing anything productive.
Right.
They're not really learning anything. They're just
Mhm.
seeing amusing stories and ideas. Now, there is a slightly different version of TikTok in China that's available, you know, for Chinese residents and citizens that isn't quite as strident and isn't quite as nonsensical.
Hmm.
Um, and that would be a good direction for us to go as well. You know, right now, people seem to be very angry all the time, and they want to fight about everything.
Mhm.
And what's the point? Most of these things are not worth getting all excited about. And besides, it doesn't do any good.
Right.
Uh, one of the things I like to do is if I'm at an event or at a party or something, I like to engage with someone whose opinions are completely different than mine, who I may disagree with, not to try to convince them of anything, but rather just to listen to what they have to say and give them a sounding board. And if they ask for, you know, a point of view, I can certainly give it, but I'm not going to convince most people of anything. But I think it's important that we really be human to one another and listen to one another.
You're so right. I've said so many times that the way people have conversations now is the one person will speaking their opinion, and the listener will listen until they hear something they don't like. And then they stop listening because they're starting to form a rebuttal, not hearing anything else the speaker is saying, but the speaker is thinking they're being heard. So we're not really having open-minded conversations anymore. We can't make progress if we aren't really trying to understand each other. I don't want to convince you I'm right. I want to understand if I'm missing something. Maybe you know something that I don't, and I need to change my opinion. But it's not about that. It's about, no, you need to understand that I'm right or you're an idiot.
Well, everybody has something to teach us. You know, anyone you meet, no matter how odd they might be or how distressed they might be, it's instructive and you can learn something from it, but you have to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I was thinking of, I wanted to get your opinion on, when we went from having no electronics to, say, starting with the calculator, and people could go to the grocery store and they could add, all their purchases on the calculator instead of doing it in their head. I think we began to start losing that ability to think in the way that we could, to use our brains. And I wonder now how many kids that are going to school and are brought up in the cell phone and the laptop era even have that ability. I'm thinking, if they're using AI to do things like, hey, read this article and tell me what the most important points are, and they're not even reading the article anymore, they're just letting someone else decide for them what's important. I'm worried that that's going to dumb us down even more.
Well, I think it's already had that effect on us, and it's particularly acute for young people. I mean, they're very smart, they're very tech savvy, they're very familiar with social media, able to use it much better than I would be able to use it. However, they, as you correctly point out, they've lost the ability to really see what is happening and what is going on. There's a difference between having your own innate conclusions about an observation and actually learning from that observation and expanding, what you may think of it. And that may seem like a nuanced difference, but it really affects how we solve problems,
Mhm.
how we deal with other humans, and our ability to process technology and work with it rather than have it work against us.
Yeah. And I think that's the fear, is because we've become such a lazy society. I just fear that we're going to take every advantage of it to not grow, to
One of
not,
the
even if you think about problem solving, if you don't understand the depth of how a problem was created, you can't solve it. And if all you're getting is the Cliff Notes version, well, here's the error code that went off. Okay, but what triggered it? And you don't know those things, and you take that approach to everything. I don't see how we grow.
Well, you're right. And I think many people, perhaps most people, are suffering from lazy brain right now because so much gets done for us. And if we want to give technology with AI the ability to run us, that's a good place to start. If you're not capable of thinking creatively and thinking about how I might solve a problem, whether it be a math problem or a sociological problem, you got to be able to do some of that yourself if we're going to effectively deal with these machines who can gather so much more data than we can process it quickly. They may seem kind of dumb now, but that's not going to be the case forever because
Right.
they learn from their experiences, unlike some of us, I think.
Mhm.
And they also learn from other machines. They learn from the data they're accumulating, and they, are able to move and process that data so much more quickly than we are. So it's going to take some doing for us to keep up.
Yeah. One thing, I haven't mentioned the name of your book yet. It's The New Roaring 20's, Prosper in Volatile Times, co-written with Paul Zane Pilzer, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. I wish him well. I hope that he's feeling better soon. But I really appreciate you getting on with this project and helping finish it and getting the book out there, because I think this is a very important piece of literature. You have a background as a movie producer, and you've produced quite a number of titles. So you're obviously very interested in what's going on in Hollywood. I recently saw an article that said Bruce Willis has given his consent, now that he's, because of his voice issues, he's unable to act. Um, but he's given his consent for his likeness to be used going forward. I don't know about you. I don't want to see a movie with digital people. I'd rather never see another Bruce Willis movie, a new one, than know that's not really him.
Well, the recent ones haven't been all that good, particularly, but he's going to be paid for that.
Mhm.
And his family and his heirs will ultimately benefit from that. I think it's a commercial decision, basically. It's not an artistic decision.
Right.
And some people will respond to that, and some people won't. Um, and, stars, people who are recognizable, will actually benefit very significantly from that if they wish to participate. They'll be paid a lot of money for their digital imaging, and they'll be able to prevent much of it from being abused, although not all of it, because there is a very strong deep fake universe out there where images are being created illegally,
Right.
and there's going to be a lot of litigation surrounding that. And then you have the people who are not stars, who are workaday actors and actresses, who whose images may be utilized and duplicated. And if you're not a star, the way these standard contracts are written, you basically cede all of your rights to the studio. I know that because I own a studio. And your standard form gives broad latitude in terms of how you use the images. A lot of these contracts traditionally have not dealt with digital imaging or AI created imaging. And I'm sure, and I know you'll see it in our contracts, which I end up writing a lot of them, we'll have to address that issue. And, I think it's probably appropriate to allow the studio to use the image very versatilely in the project that's being worked on, that the actor is being paid for, and that's part of the bargain, the business arrangement. But to then use that image in other programs, other films, that strikes me as not appropriate and something that really needs to be a separate negotiation, even if it's not a star involved, just if it's, an actor.
Right.
So,
and my understanding is that they're doing that in a lot of the background actor contracts, that if you're a background actor, even for one day on the set, they have the right to use your image in perpetuity on anything and never hire you again. And there's a couple problems with that. I mean, for one, you could be put in things that you maybe morally or, politically or whatever would not want to be a part of and would not have done. There's the fact that you're not being paid to get on any other project, and you're not going to get hired for anything else because they don't need to pay you. And then third, that's how a lot of actors get started. That's how they network and meet people and, get noticed, and they do a few background gigs. The next thing you know, they're on a film and they get a line of dialogue, and it just kind of builds from there. It seems like it's a career killer.
well, I think that usage in other projects it's my opinion, that's just wrong.
Mhm.
And the Screen Actors Guild, I know, is focused on that issue generally, but they need to get very specific in the standard contracts dealing with this, to the effect that, okay, it's all right to have a standard deal where in the context of a specific project, you can use the image, AI or otherwise, but anything else is verboten. It's out of bounds and shouldn't be permitted. And I think that's one of the points. And I think most studios will agree with that. I think that's where consensus can be reached. But the Guild's going to need to be very careful and very sophisticated in how they define this. And then you have so many actors who are not Guild, or who work financial core and
Right.
aren't necessarily governed in all cases by Guild contract language. What do you do about those? Well, I kind of think our position will be, again, the position I've just stated. You can use it for the project, but beyond that, it doesn't seem quite right.
Aren't we really talking about potential federal likeness rights laws like we have federal copyright laws?
Well, there's a right of publicity, certainly, which is, someone who is a public person has the right to protect that image and be compensated for that image, with certain exceptions for what is news or, what can be put out there in a traditional news format. You also have a right of privacy, which is kind of a different sort of thing, which is the right not to be exploited and not to be exposed unnecessarily or inappropriately. This is not quite either of those things. This really has to do with the ability to use an image, in a legitimate program. And I think this is going to, as is implicit in your question, this is going to result in a lot of litigation.
Yeah.
And I think the courts are ultimately going to decide whether the rights of publicity or the rights of privacy prevail. But a starting point is for the guilds to establish their language and their position on all this. But again, I really want them to be very nuanced and sophisticated in this regard and really think about what the future might hold. And that will require them, I think, to consult with experts who have an understanding of where artificial intelligence might be going, and to confer with technologists and others who can look around the corner and kind of anticipate what the issues might be in the future, because they're not all that obvious.
Right. Well, I think back to a couple issues that I'll present you with, and then I definitely wanted we had started talking about Spotify before we started recording, and I want to get back to that. But I was composing a film, and there were a lot of issues with the director, and it kind of split into two camps. They ended up rewriting parts of the film after the whole film was shot, and there's a particularly prominent actress that was in the film, and I'm thinking, you're changing the story dramatically. She's already shot her parts. You're working around what she shot. What if she wouldn't have consented to being in this new film? Maybe the storyline would be something that goes against her principles. And I thought that's kind of a potential issue. But then a couple of weeks ago, I saw a video of Michael Jackson's Thriller replaced by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I'll tell you, it wasn't 100% convincing. I mean, there were definitely some graphical issues and, some voice flaws. But if I didn't know better, that would have been pretty convincing. And I started to think, that's scary because, like you said, there's deep fakes out there. People have the technology to do whatever they want now. And then I saw the one that really hit me. And it was an argument between Donald Trump and Joe Biden with very explicit language, obviously something that never happened. But when you're watching this thing, if you didn't know better, you wouldn't know better. And I think that's where my biggest fear comes in, is the reputations of people. Everybody's so ready to jump on anybody that does the slightest thing wrong, especially if you're a celebrity. You cuss in public one time and there's all these news articles and people posting on TikTok about it.
Sure.
This is the scariest part of it to me. What do you think?
Well, I think it is scary, and it's going to be very difficult to regulate. The large social media platforms have the ability to display all kinds of content and are not really responsible for the nature of that content. And this was sort of an inflection point in the growth of social media, and also the growth of misinformation and of really very questionable content that is similar to what you're describing. Now, going forward with the ability to digitally change things, this has kind of been with us for a while, and we've seen examples of it, but it's just going to get more pervasive and more convincing. Again, I think this is going to be an area that's going to be litigated, and some principles will begin to establish themselves, but it may already be too late.
Yeah.
Very hard to police this sort of thing. There's a real question as to whether the law, which made it permissible for social media not to be responsible for, what it presented, and to kind of ignore the worst aspects of human behavior. At that point, that we may have crossed the Rubicon, and now we're dealing with the next phases of this, which is going to be even worse than what we have. So I don't know that I have a good solution for it at this point, but it's something as you suggest, we need to be very fearful of and concerned about. And, where we can, we need to do something about it.
Well, I think that maybe we can even use the technology to save us from the technology, right? We have YouTube will flag a video for copyright violation before it's even done uploading, because it scans the file as it's uploading to detect any violations.
Yes.
I had an interview I did with a friend of mine who did I think we put a 5-second clip of a cover song of that he did from Billy Idol, and I got flagged before that video was even done uploading. Maybe we can use that same technology to flag videos then that people need to review, and start making those sites a little bit more responsible for what kind of content goes out. That could be something that creates jobs.
Well, I think you're spot on, and you've said it very well. AI is going to solve a lot of problems, as well as creating a lot of problems. And there, are so many areas that AI is going to improve our ability to do the things we do now. And managing content may well be an area. And, copyright is going to become more and more important as AI and other technology are able to abuse it.
Mhm.
And YouTube and their and some of the other platforms, their surveillance of copyright is an excellent example.
Mhm. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where that goes. I have to think that uh, we're going to head into lawsuitville for every little thing that goes on, and we're going to have to be prepared for that. But you and I were talking before we started recording about Spotify, and you were starting to tell me how you feel Spotify has devalued music. I know what you mean by that, but let's share with the audience.
Well, there's something that's called Spotify syndrome. And Spotify, by the way it has commercialized music and recreated the revenue stream, has made it very difficult for artists and creators to make much money unless you're a tremendously big act. It's very hard for that to be a reliable revenue stream that enables you to live a decent life. And most artists are not making money off Spotify. Anytime you have a subscription service like Netflix or others that give you virtually an unlimited amount of content for a fixed price, you now have devalued content.
Mhm.
It's no longer a situation where you have to go to the theater and buy a ticket, or you have to buy a DVD, and create a revenue stream which supports the investment. And content has become increasingly expensive, but increasingly devalued. I mean, if you can get on a streaming service and have 1,000 movies to look at, or more, of course, um, that's different than buying them one at a time, and it devalues content. We certainly have seen that in music,
Mhm.
and now it's happened for film and video as well.
Right.
Uh, and this is part of what's caused the strike. People are not being paid. The streaming companies have a system where they do not wish to uh, illuminate us as to their algorithms, or the revenue that a particular piece of content may be generating. Part of that is because they don't know in certain cases, because it is a subscription service that the revenue is not necessarily attached to a specific piece of content.
Right.
But there are ways of evaluating this. We have a streaming service called Here TV. My business partner Paul Collishman and I, another Paul, and he he and his team are very sophisticated in measuring what it costs to attract a subscriber and the piece of content that actually attracts that specific subscriber, and they're able to value that, so that the larger streaming companies, because we're a small one, the largest streaming companies can do a version of this, but for the most part, they're resisting it at this point, at least to the extent that the guilds would like to see it part of the mechanism to value content and value the work of creatives.
Mhm.
It's interesting because Netflix may well have the most incentive to settle this strike and to come up with a formula, because they don't they have one line of business, and all their revenue comes from that business,
Right.
and they don't need to be concerned about theatrical or any of the other business lines that most of the studios do. And Netflix has kind of won this battle, the streaming battle. They won it years ago. They were first. Uh, in the last several years, they've started to actually make money doing it. They spent a long period of time, 20 years or so, losing money with their service. But they had the backing of investors and venture capital and banks, so they were able to prevail. And it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for any of the major streaming services to catch up with them and close the gap. Disney probably has a shot. I'm not confident that Max will prevail. They seem to have made a series of missteps. They may be able to course correct, but I think Netflix is the winner, and the other guys are struggling to, close the gap, become profitable. They managed to ruin a perfectly good cable TV and DVD business by pursuing streaming and putting all their chips on Netflix Red, and basically blew up a perfectly good business that was able to pay residuals and was profitable, and chase this streaming chimera. And I'm not sure it's worked out well for anyone other than Netflix.
Well, I hate that we're running out of time, but I'd like to ask you one more question if I could. Mark Ruffalo made a comment at one of the rallies, and he was talking about start doing independent films. And I started to think, is this time to tell the studios we don't need you, that we don't need another 18 Avengers films, we don't need $50 million films all the time, we just want to be entertained with good stuff? And I mean, the point of the studios is really that they can fund the bigger movies and support the actors while they're making it. But if we went independent, I think they would get there eventually. It just depends on how long and how many people can survive it. Is this the time to tell the studios that we don't need them?
Well,
I don't mean to offend you because I know you own a studio, but you know what I mean.
No, but we're independent. We're far away different from a major studio. I mean, we make films for their catering budgets. Our films are, very carefully managed and very carefully fitted to the revenue side of things. So the answer to your question is not an easy one. First of all, the studios have managed, in my humble opinion, to botch their business and have made a series of mistakes over the years that they may or may not recover from. So there is, much like AI, more than a zero chance that the studios will not necessarily disappear, but be a shell of their former selves, and they will have ended a 100-year plus old business. Mm-hmm. So first of all, a lot of mistakes on the studio side.
Sure.
Secondly, yes, independent film, I think independent film production is going to increase. However, we don't see people going to the theaters to see independent films necessarily. They just aren't making money in the theaters, and it's expensive to release films, even independent films, and it's hard to make money doing it. That model is kind of broken because if you want to see independent films, you can see them on the streaming services.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say everything would be straight to streaming, probably.
I think so. And we're kind of seeing that already. That's kind of already happened. I mean, there are, big projects that are paid for by the streamers, but a lot of the films are, a lot of them are foreign films. And there is a distinct possibility that what the studios will have done is inadvertently, like in many other manufacturing businesses, moved it offshore, so that a very goodly part of the films that we see in this country may not come out of Hollywood necessarily, may come from other places. We're already seeing, the success of Korea and a lot of other Asian and European countries in particular, and they have, for the most part, subsidy programs and co-production arrangements, and they're able to make movies, for the most part, more effectively than the current U.S. studio system can do it, which has, gotten bloated, and the kind of salaries that are made, not only by the top executives at the studio level, but all the way down they're not supportable by the revenue model. So it's possible that we are now outsourcing a lot of our production offshore, which has happened in a lot of other areas, and we may try to bring it back. One interesting thing that I've observed is, I've always loved foreign language films. And one of our films, Departures, won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, a Japanese
Congratulations.
film. And I really have always enjoyed those movies. I've enjoyed going to the theaters, where I normally sit by myself or with a small group of people watching these films. Not always, but I've been amazed at how much foreign language product is on, particularly Netflix, but the other streamers as well, and how people have become, with respect to streaming, very comfortable with subtitles and closed captioning. I wouldn't have expected that to happen the way it has. Some people still don't like it and don't want to watch it, but a lot of people have gotten very comfortable with it. And there are many people who will watch even English language programming with the closed captions on, just so they make sure they hear the dialogue.
And there's a lot of overdubbing too, where we get a lot. I've seen a lot of foreign films on Netflix where they'll overdub the audio track with American actors.
It's true. And, languaging is going to be a tremendous area for AI. The ability to redub a film is going to be far less expensive and far more effective than it has been. It's been quite expensive to do that historically. That's going to be fairly easy to do, and it's going to be done in voices that are very similar to the actors that you are used to speaking. And that's going to be a whole business, I think. And languaging in general, if there are diplomatic negotiations, AI has the ability to translate in real time. Now, that poses all sorts of geopolitical questions as to hacking of translation services, but it is the future. It is what's going to happen. It just will pose all kinds of interesting problems.
Well, it seems like with every new thing comes a whole new set of problems, and navigating it is going to be very important. So people should really check out your book, The New Roaring 20s, Prosper in Volatile Times. I've got the links for it in the show notes. What can we expect in this book?
Well, we identify 12 pillars, things that will be prevalent. And the biggest part of the book is technology and artificial intelligence, the continued use of robots, the continued advance of AI, and how it's going to affect employment and all of our lives. We also deal with the risks of technology, the fact that this is probably not going to be the end of us, but it could be the end of us. A lot of people are going to, as we discussed earlier, lose their jobs or have to transition to something else. We strongly believe that it's time for a universal basic income where everyone in this country receives a stipend, not a large one, maybe a couple $1,000s a month, but that'll make a huge difference for people transitioning and just people in general, because they won't be down to their last dollar from their paycheck month after month. They'll have a little bit of flexibility in the event of a crisis or an event of losing a job. And it's time to do that and replace a lot of the very antiquated and ineffective social welfare systems that we have. So we spend quite a bit of time on that. We also spend time on the nature of happiness. And we were talking earlier about all of us perhaps looking to being more human in order to deal with this coming world that's upon us, and being of service to others. And frankly, if you will do that, you're the winner. You'll be much happier. You'll have a better life because you're really helping others and feeling good about it. And you should expect nothing in return. You do it because it's the right thing to do and because you're trying to be human in an AI world.
Oh, yeah, so important. And like you said earlier, folks, reach out to people you care about. You know what? Life, we get busy, it goes fast. I every day I wake up and I'm like, what happened to yesterday? It just times like the heartbeat of the world has sped up. Reach out to people you care about. Don't be like, well, it's a two-way street. Just reach out to people. You'll be amazed at the experiences that you'll have. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. Jarchow, I know I mispronounced your name earlier. I'm so sorry. I said exactly that I wasn't going to do that, and then I always do that. But please also pass along my thanks to Paul for writing this book. Folks, check it out. As always, the links are in the show notes. Stephen, if you would hold on for me for one more minute. Folks, I want to remind you that this is going to be the last episode before the break while I transition the podcast to another distributor. That will take me a week or so to get everything relinked. I mean, we're on episode 351, so that's a lot of relinking, a lot of re-uploading show notes, as I learned with the Uriah Heep podcast. But these shows that are on YouTube, such as this one, will still be there. Those aren't going anywhere. It's just the audio feed only. And then in a week or so, I'll have everything relinked on the website and all the socials, of course. And guys, AI is a scary thing, but it's up to you how you work with it. You can choose to let it do all the work for you, or you can choose to continue to be active and use a part of your brain and grow your own intelligence, because I think that's the one thing that we need the most. Any final thoughts, Stephen?
Well, I think we've hit on, what we intended to hit on.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the purpose of conversations like this is in an accessible way to permit people to begin to think about this and to be concerned about it, but also recognize it's going to create opportunity. And it's up to you how you respond to all this. And it's going to be a fast-moving, wonderful world, but a world replete with danger.
Well said. Well said. And a great note to end on. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll see what happens from here. And good luck to all of our friends in Hollywood and New York and everyone who's standing up in the strike. You're doing it for a reason, and my heart is with you. Cheers.